AJ, do you always tell the truth?
I always attempt to, as far as I know it at that time, yes.
So, did you walk on water?
No?
Did you raise Lazarus from the dead?
Yes.
So you saying that you did some sort of miracles, but not other sorts?
There's a few miracles in the Bible I didn't do, but the rest...
The rest you did?
The rest I did.
How many Mary Magdalenes have there been in your life?
There's only one Mary Magdalene in my life.
But there's been others. Is it two, three?
No, you're not asking me, you're telling me.
All right, I'm asking you.
Okay.
Did you tell other girls before Mary that they were Mary Magdalene?
I told, yes, definitely.
And transgression against God's moral law, well, for most of us we go, well, how do we know what God's moral laws are anyway? So that's a bit fuzzy, that one, isn't it, for us? What does that mean? For most of us, you go, oh, that's anybody's guess.
G'day, welcome to this video about AJ Miller and his ministry, Divine Truth. If you don't know who AJ Miller is, he's a guy that lives in Queensland, Australia. I live in Queensland, Australia too. I'm within 100 kilometres of where this guy has his property. So he believes he's Jesus. He believes that, well, to some extent he believes in reincarnation, obviously. And so he's got a bit of a following. And so we're just going to look at some of his teachings. We'll just look at a video randomly. What I've found with his videos is he's just rambling complete and utter garbage that goes nowhere, and the crowd is just looking at him kind of going, oh yeah, okay, maybe it'll start making sense in a minute. And it never starts making sense. They're perpetually waiting for the punchline and it never comes. And but at the same time, along the way, he's making all these statements, which when you think about them, you can see that they're false. But because they don't think about them, they're just sitting there being fooled by this nobody. I mean, as far as people go, he's an average person, like nothing against him personally, but he's no son of God. He's no exaltable guru. He's nothing impressive. He's not the Jesus Christ of the Bible. I like the Jesus Christ of the Bible. He's awesome. He's exactly what you'd expect to see as the one and only begotten Son of the Creator of the universe. But AJ Miller is not the same person, but he thinks he is. But anyway, so I don't know what. We'll just go with number 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 7. Creation of sin. And we'll go to what? 15 minutes.
Divine Truth.
I haven't watched this video. I haven't watched many of his videos. I've watched a few bits and pieces. What's happening at 15 minutes in?
Life. If you look at a family where a husband and wife are fighting and arguing, the family's very in a bickering state, and they have children, how do those children feel? They're tense, unable to thrive because they're in an environment that is unpredictable, uncertain, unsafe. And this is what our universal life would be if God hadn't created laws. So without law, you can see our entire life would not even be possible. Without law, there would be no framework for survival. So law is an essential part of our existence, and we need to come to grasp that and appreciate that, as I ought.
Yeah, one part of his ministry is he brings in like environmental law and science law, and so the laws of kind of physics to some extent and metaphysical things, and kind of merges them with laws of morality. So he merges laws regarding, well, the governing of reality with laws of morality. Jesus doesn't do that. In the Bible, that's not part of what Jesus does, but it's what this guy does.
God. people, whether you're religious or not, most people have a fair few hang-ups about that word too, right? And I find that interesting that the word sin has so many negative connotations. Right? And mostly that's because sin is aligned with judgment. The main reason why people don't want to discuss their sins is because usually sins result in judgment of some kind. Now, when you think about that, you think about how sort of the world is with that. You can see that, let's say somebody does something wrong by the law of the land. Usually, everybody around them wants them to get caught, if it's something they feel is really bad. And when they do get caught, what happens? There's all this judgment that's heaped upon the person, right? And the person in the end is not looking at why they did what they did. They're looking at trying to slime out of getting away with it, aren't they?
Well, it depends on what kind of person they are. So no, you're wrong.
Now, you look at particular sins.
You'll get that with him a lot. Like, he overgeneralizes. Like, he'll say that things are a certain way, but then you think about it and realise, well, it's only that way some of the time. He's full of incorrect statements. But all his followers are just sitting there none the wiser. They just accept everything he says.
In particular, things like molestation, sexual molestation of children. Right? Now, we know it happens a lot in the world, don't we? There's institutions like the Catholic Church and other churches that have gone through whole processes because there's so much of it happening. And yet, nobody wants to own up to it. Nobody wants to pay for it. And nobody wants to identify it and discuss it. Everyone's uncomfortable about it. And nobody wants to resolve the actual reason why it happens. Right? And this is what happens when we ignore the causes of sin and we use a lot of judgment instead. Right? That's why these things happen. So let's look at the word sin and you can see in the word, in the way it's been used historically, that sometimes it's quite clear that it's more like a scientific fact, and then other times it's quite clear it's more like a judgment, isn't it? With the different words that we use against it. So let's look at some of these words. Missing the mark of perfection in love. That sounds fairly innocent, doesn't it? In the old times, it was like the word came from a series of words that meant when you aimed at a target, like with an bow and arrow, and you're aiming at a target, and you miss the bullseye, you miss the mark. That's really what it meant. Right? Now, if you think about your day-to-day life, you could pretty much say, well, a lot of times I miss the mark in my day-to-day life, so probably, if that's all the word sin means, that's pretty innocent, isn't it? You could pretty much say, well, a lot of times I miss the mark in my day-to-day life, so probably, if that's all the word sin means, that's pretty innocent, isn't it? It's about making a mistake, not hitting the target, not being accurate. So that's a fairly innocent way to describe sin. This one gets a bit tougher. Falling short of the glory of God, or contrary to the holy character of God. Now there's the other three-letter word that nobody wants to talk about either, God. And so now we're mixing two three-letter words, sin in reference to God. And of course now people are starting to get a bit complicated about that, right? But all that really means is that God has a nature that is sinless. So any time we don't meet or we fall short of God's nature, we are falling short of the glory of God. It's quite simple to understand that. And that is also what really sin is. Transgression against God's moral law, contrary to law, ignorance of law. Well, that's fairly simple. Ignorance is law. It means I just didn't know. Contrary to law means I did something opposite or contrary to the law. And transgression against God's moral law, well, for most of us we go, well, how do we know what God's moral laws are anyway? So that's a bit fuzzy, that one, isn't it, for us? What does that mean? For most of us, you go, oh, that's anybody's guess. And honestly, on earth, it is anybody's guess, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is your guru, man. This is your guru. This is the guy who you're taking as giving you divine truth. He says he's Jesus Christ from the 1st century. Jesus Christ in the Bible gave a law. The Old Testament said the Messiah was bringing a law. I think it's in Isaiah 42. It says, and the coastlands shall wait for his law. So in the New Testament, Jesus said that the law which he is teaching is the law of God, which to some extent was contained in the law of Moses, but the law of Moses contained a whole lot of other stuff too. And Jesus was teaching a more well-defined version of the truth of correct morality, God's law, or the moral law as they're calling it, even though that term's not in the Bible. So how's that, man? He's coming out and saying, oh, well, your guess is as good as mine. Oh, it's so fluffy. Oh, we can't know. So, yeah, whatever, mate. Your truth is not divine. It's demonic. And he does literally channel spirits. You'll see that on his channel. You can look on his channel here. We'll see if we can find a video of that. He calls them his spirit friends, or he uses the term our spirit friends. He talks to the people, like his audience, saying, oh yeah, and our spirit friends have this to say. And then there's some kind of information that apparently they got from spirits. And then on other occasions, there's footage of the person actually being inhabited with this spirit, and they're putting on a different personality. He brings these spirits into his wife.
Divine Truth Spirit Experiences Discussion. Experiences of people who have lived on earth and who have now passed into the spirit world. The title of the first part of this personal experience from spirits discussion is Sebastian and the Seventh Sphere Transition, during which Mary channels Sebastian, an atheist spirit who previously spoke to Jesus a few weeks prior.
Welcome everyone. I'm here with Jesus and we're going to do some mediumship today. And today there's a group of spirits who we spoke to some weeks ago who were led by a man called Sebastian. And if you haven't seen the discussion with Sebastian, go and take a look before you listen to this one. Sebastian and his group were in the 6th sphere when we last spoke to them. Hello, brother and friend.
How are you? Hard to say, eh?
How can we answer that question easily? Yeah, we're so happy to come back and speak with you again, if only to express our gratitude for the help that you gave to us in our last discussion.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
We've made...
Yeah, so I read a passage today in Chronicles, I think it was 32, but it's all through the Old Testament. Man, seeking those spirits of the dead is a massive, massive sin. But of course, like he just said, he doesn't know what sin is. I mean, he's giving a teaching on what sin is and sin isn't. And then it comes to the topic of the moral law and he says, oh, I don't know what that is. No one knows what it is. But he's giving an advanced teaching on what sin is and what sin is not. Mate, if you believe in this guy, you are totally deceived. You need to wake up and be ashamed of yourself and start reading the Bible. And stop being so proud and up yourself, thinking that you're more woke than all those stupid religious people. Mate, you're the idiot, following this guy without even testing the things he's saying. Okay. Yeah. You think there's some kind of shame in like just getting a revelation from the Bible? You know, like believing in a version of God which aligns with the Bible? It doesn't mean that you have to believe in the Bible alone. It just means that the Bible is a reliable revelation from the God that the Bible talks about. That's all. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying that, yeah, that Bible thing, it's from the God that the Bible talks about. It's his book. There's a God, and he has a book which is made up of writings about him for the past few thousands of years. Like, well, the last ones were about 1900 years ago, the New Testament. And then the other ones are from 500 years before that, 6, 7, 8, 900, and everywhere in between up to like, I don't know what the oldest ones are, like 2 or 3,500 years before that. I don't know when the books of Moses were written, but they were the first recorded ones, I think. But you can fact check me on that. But yeah, so the Bible is a compilation of writings, some of them about 5,000 years old, at least 4,000 years old, written in Hebrew, the newer ones written in Greek. Yeah, it's about this God that's been interacting with human beings. But all these people, including him, that's not good enough for him. All this ancient gobbledygook, oh no, forget about that. We've got some new stuff. And what's the new stuff? Whatever this fluff bag makes up on the spot. It's ridiculous. It's stupid. But anyway, I try not to use that word. I consider it almost a swear word. Because I'm afraid of God. Yeah. So look. Yeah, there's other passages I watched earlier that are him teaching that God doesn't get angry. God will tell you what to do, but he doesn't get upset when you don't do it.
He doesn't want you to do what he says. In fact, what he'll do is he'll tell you what is the right and wrongs of things, but you can still do what you want. Right? It's not like a parent is going to give you a whole list of things and say, now if you don't do what I just suggested, you're banned, you're disinherited, and so forth, right? He's not like that. Right? So that's how we need to see God.
That's not how God is. God's not like going to cut you off and disinherit you for not doing what he says. That's what he said. Yeah, passages in the Bible teach the opposite of what he says in regards to that.
Most people make up a religious faith of some kind and they just guess what God might want and what God doesn't.
I mean, I'm just saying the Bible. I'm saying read the Bible, and it agrees with all the heaven and hell testimonies. He's mocking, saying, oh, these people, yeah, they just make stuff up. And so what's their response? They just sit there and they're like, oh. This chick's getting a bit of a giggle about it, like she's laughing along with him going, oh yeah, those religious people, they're so stupid, they just make stuff up. Not like us, we're just listening to this guy make stuff up, but we're not the ones who believe in stuff that's just made up. Those people who believe in the Bible, they believe in stuff that's just made up. Mate, when you get into the like trying to disprove the Bible, man, you got a big task on your hands, because first you got the first 4 books of the New Testament, and they all agree with the Old Testament so much, and then you got the epistles from the Apostle Paul. Like, if the Bible was all just made up, man, they went to some extreme lengths to convince you, because like not only are there those 4 different versions of the gospel which all agree with each other, then you got the book of Acts, then you've got all these letters that are supposedly from Christians to other Christians in the first century, in the same generation that of Jesus that was walking on the earth, that had claimed they had seen him rise from the dead, well, after he'd risen from the dead, seen him being killed, and then seen him not long after the body disappeared. People started seeing him walking around. Yeah, you got all these letters from the Apostle Paul, from Peter, all these different things that were happening in the church in the first century. So, man, if this was all made up, man, they went to some great lengths and gave us some really elaborate detail. Like, they really fleshed this lie out. It's not a lie, man. It's what it is. It's what it seems to be, and that is some people that encountered what they're claiming they encountered. But and look, the writings in the Bible, they're not the only ones. They're not the only writings. There's all kinds of letters from Christians in the first century that didn't make it into the Bible. Man, it ain't made up. A.J. Miller is making stuff up.
In the Bible, as the law says, you must not divorce your wife. That means basically that 1/3 of all marriages that have ever happened on earth, at least, have all been a sin because they all got divorced. But then what happens with the people who stay together and they don't care about each other? Are they transgressing against God's law? Well, of course they are. But nobody says anything about that. So again,
most people make up a religious faith of some kind and they just guess what God might want and what God doesn't.
but then what happens with the people who stay together and they don't care about each other? Are they transgressing against God's law? Well, of course they are.
Most people make up a religious faith of some kind and they just guess what God might want and what God doesn't.
So see how he's mocking the Bible now? So yeah, that's where you're at. You're with a guy that's claiming he's giving divine truth. He's just making it up as he goes. Then he mocks those who have a religious faith, saying that they have a made-up faith. Then he mocks what's in the Bible. Man, at least we're not the ones who made it up. You're just making it up as you go. Then you mock people who believe things that are just made up.
We're a bit uncertain about that. Let's look at the next one. Unrighteousness, unrightness, or disharmony with God's truth. Well, again, when we talk about disharmony with God's truth, it's like, who knows what that is? So unrighteousness, well, that comes down to, doesn't it, just what I think is right and what you think is right. And the reality is most of the time we disagree with what is right. So now it becomes what I think is right. But here we're talking about there is an actual right, an actual moral truth.
But he doesn't know what it is. And he says you can't know what it is. It's not the one in the Bible, and it's not anything that he says. It just can't be known. Okay, so there's A.J. Miller. Obviously I got angry. Here's an example of where Jesus got angry. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. He calls them a brood of vipers later on. Hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise seed and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Yeah. So yeah, obviously I don't really like A.J. Miller that too much, but as the Bible says, we are to do good to people, to love your neighbour as yourself. I wouldn't mind someone going off about me on the internet. I wouldn't care. But the first time I ever saw that he was evil was way back in the day when I saw him complaining about these people that had come from the other side of the world, come from Europe to Australia to spend time with him. And they desperately wanted to spend some time alone with him, just to, maybe even him and his wife, just wanted a private dinner. Instead of being just part of an audience, they wanted some time to like ask him some private questions, just dinner one night. And apparently they petitioned him for a while, and he kept rejecting them, and so eventually they left in a huff. They left upset and went back to Europe, being upset that he wouldn't even give them any of his time, even though they'd come from the other side of the world at their own cost. Thousands and thousands of dollars to come over here, spending their time there. And he mocked the idea that they had a right to that, saying, that they were unreasonable for expecting a bit of his time. And so he was telling the story after they'd left, saying that, yeah, they were being selfish. They were being unloving. I just thought, you slime bag, you complete and utter dirtbag. These people have come from the other side of the world and to see you because of your stupid teachings on the internet, and you don't feel obligated to make it worth their while? Even though you've got all this time on your hands, you don't give up even a little bit of your time for these people that have invested so much in coming to see you? Nah, that's called selfishness, man. And then he turns around and accuses them of being unloving. The dude is a filthy, slimy, unjust person, okay? And he's not wise at all, as far as I can tell. There's people that I find to be far more impressive than him